Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Michael and Patty Show, otherwise known as MAPS. I'm Michael.
And I'm Patty.
It's a rainy day in Prince Edward Island, but it's good to see we've got at least 3 boats in the water here at the Charlottetown Yacht Club on the water. Obviously, welcome to Prince Edward Island's real estate podcast, also covering a lot of stuff that's pretty common in all of North America, both U.S. and Canadian real estate. Anything to add before we get started in episode, what are we at here, 136?
136. Yeah, it is nice to see the boats out. There was actually sailboats out yesterday, which was really pretty to see, and it's my favorite time of year here in Charlottetown and on the island.
Well, let's get started here. It is raining. Hopefully the microphones won't pick that up since our studio is mobile and unsponsored by Ford F-150. We're going to talk about things you should be doing this time of the year, this being May. This is early May when this is being recorded. It'll probably be released towards June. But the one thing I notice is air conditioners. If you are buying an air conditioner, you want to do it sooner than later, because I remember last year I was watching the window air conditioners because I had clients that wanted to buy them. And basically, they went from about $200 to $500 for just a little air conditioner, and then eventually just you couldn't buy one. So when it got really, really hot and humid here, as it gets in many places, you couldn't buy an air conditioner. But I do want to point out a latest discovery I had, which is a brand called Midea, Midea. This podcast is not sponsored by them, but you may want to check out the Midea air conditioners. They have a really neat air conditioner that basically allows you to still open and close your window, but it splits the air conditioner in 2 pieces. It's about, I think they say about 10 times quieter, 35% more efficient. It uses inverter technology. It's something you probably want to check out, but if you're talking humidity and heat, it's on its way by that air conditioner now, or put those heat pumps in or whatever you're going to do, air conditioning system, before it becomes impossible to get for very expensive. Patty, anything to add to air conditioners?
No, and when this episode is actually released, it'll still be early enough, I feel, in the season to get ahead of this. Our peak summer typically happens around mid-July until around the end of August. We have beautiful September, October, but it will still be in time, and you don't want to wait until the dead heat of summer, if that's a statement, a line that I can use, before you decide to invest into some sort of air conditioning unit.
Let's talk about Kitec Plumbing. Kitec Plumbing, we've mentioned on this show a number of times. It's spelled K-I-T-E-C. It's typically an orange tubing, and it does say Kitec on it, but I've been following this for years. It came out, I think, late 90s and they stopped making it in early 2000s. So if you're buying a property that was put up in that sort of time span, you may want to look for Kitec.
I thought it was 2006 or 2007 when they stopped producing Kitec, somewhere around there.
It was early 2000s.
Okay. So if they're looking for a home and it's built around that time, just a red flag to
probably
maybe investigate.
Yeah, 96 to 2007. I didn't put that down here, but I have been watching this over the years because I notice properties, and I remember plumbers saying, oh, you don't need to worry about it. Oh, no, it's fine. I've got it in my house. And these are plumbers that, of course, put it in tons of houses and buildings. But I've been watching the long-term research here. They basically says there's no official long-term failure data that exists for Kitec Plumbing. However, they do say that the typical lifespan is under 10 years. So we're getting to that 10-year limitation, often shorter depending on water conditions, widely considered a when, not if, failure. This is the really interesting part of this. So everyone that's a proponent of Kitec and says it doesn't matter, they say here that there's 100% eventual failure rate. So basically, if you're not familiar with Kitec, the connectors will fall off, the hose will split. It's bad stuff. I've seen houses. I made an offer on one where the vendors were hiding it. They basically built an enclosure, but we were smart enough to tear the top off of this because you could remove the top and discovered Kitec buried in the basement. Of course, you're not going to see it in the walls. Patty?
I was just going to say, when you said we're at that limit some of these homes are around 30 years old. And if they have not failed up to this point, I would be very cautious.
You're on borrowed time.
Yes.
Common issues worsen over time. Fitting corrosion. So that's like the connectors, the fittings are corroding, the pipe breaks down, which I mentioned. Heat pressure damage. Most systems today are well past their expected life. Insurers often, and I haven't seen this, I don't know if you have, restrict or deny coverage if Kitec is present. Have you seen this?
I don't know of any insurance company that actually goes in. They're usually concerned with roof,
Oil tanks.
Heat systems, but I wouldn't be surprised.
So the practical advice, which isn't really all that helpful, is replace it proactively, which is easier said than done. If you have Kitec plumbing buried in your slab because you have in-floor heat, or of course all your plumbing is running through walls that are insulated, it's not that easy just to go in and start replacing this. So avoid this stuff like the plague. Do look for it and make sure your home inspector looks for it. And the other thing, as a side note, I recently acquired a home insurance policy, and I noticed the coverage was kind of minimal. And one thing they omitted, which I felt was probably the most important part of any homeowner's policy in this particular case, because there is an oil tank, is the oil tank clause, which was only $50 to $100 a year to cover. But if you get into a situation where you're going to fill up of 800 or 900 liters of fuel, and that tank leaks, that is a catastrophic situation. You just don't suck the oil up and move on with the day. You usually have to call in excavators to replace the soil around the house. It can contaminate the water table. It's an expensive mess. So you want to make sure that you do have coverage that covers an oil spill.
Yes, well, you just went from Kitec to oil spills.
That's the good thing about this podcast is there's no preparation. You never know where we're going to end up.
But it was all to do with the insurance for Kitec, and just one more item to be mindful.
Well, we got into the insurance companies restricting or denying coverage for Kitec, which I said I haven't seen any insurance company ever mention Kitec. They may be looking for it, not mentioning it to us. But however, like if you've got a house built between 96, 2006, you don't know if there's Kitec in the walls. The only thing you can inspect are those things that are visible. And probably 99% of the houses at some point, typically in the utility room or sometimes the garage, you're going to see some piping.
Yeah. The good thing is I haven't seen a lot of them here on the island, but they do exist.
I've seen a few.
Correct.
We're going to move along to a topic that Patty mentioned in the last podcast, which we actually just recorded yesterday, which is efflorescence, which is like a powdery, chalky, crystalline substance you usually see on walls in basements that are constructed with blocks.
Yeah, I've been in a few homes this last week, and there was a home seller that had quite a bit of efflorescence in their basement, and they had no idea what it was. So it's just very much so top of mind. So I just want to give a little definition or description of what efflorescence is. So if you are a homeowner currently, you can obviously go down and check out your basement because you'll know what it is now. And if you're a purchaser and you're looking at homes, we mentioned it when we were saying what to look for because we provided a checklist of viewings. When you're viewing a property, here's some things to look at. So this is a continuation of that. Efflorescence is a white powdery crystalline deposit of salts that form on surfaces like concrete, brick, or stone. When water evaporates, it leaves the salt behind. So it's just a salt crystallization. It looks kind of like a white, fuzzy-looking, film.
Looks like almost looks like a frost. What do you call those?
Yeah, frost that has gone through one of those freeze-dry.
Like a snowflake almost.
Correct, yes. It typically, so depending on how much there is, I've seen homes that just have a little area. They'll usually be in an area of the home that perhaps the drainage outside isn't the best because it's not draining away. So it typically signifies that moisture is migrating through a porous material, usually cosmetic issue. It indicates water drainage issues around the foundation. So you might want to, if you see this in a home, it's not to say that, oh, red flag, can't buy this house. It may be the troughs are not being properly drained and taken away from the foundation. It may be that the grading of the earth around this property is grading, because you had mentioned, Michael, grading towards the foundation. You really want to make sure that everything drains away from the foundation, because it'll avoid this. Now, if you do have it, it depends on how bad it is. If you have one that's on all four walls of this foundation and outside doesn't look too bad, you might have a high water table. There may be some other things you might want to look into. But just be mindful, as long as you know what it is, then you can make an informed decision. You can do your own research and decide whether or not, this is a property for you or a project you're willing to take on. And if you're a home seller, removal of it, first make sure that you deal with the issue outside of the home. But inside, if you have and you've done a few remedies, your gutters now, everything drains away, and now you're left with this white powdery crystal on the inside, removal typically is just a dry brush, maybe a little bit of water, and it just scrubs off just lightly, because it can form on things like concrete, brick, stone, anywhere that water evaporates and leaves that behind. So easy to clean up, just depends on how much you have and what the situation outside looks like.
But at the end of the day, it indicates a basement that's, I'm not sure if you want to use the word leaking, but water's traveling through that basement. Why I mentioned block foundations is because it seems to be more prevalent on block foundations than it would with poured concrete. Definitely, you're probably not going to see it at all with ICF.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I don't think I've ever seen that on an ICF
Well,
home.
you're not, because if it happens, it's going to happen on the other side of the styrofoam.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But it's probably not going to happen. The way you would avoid this, because I've owned a house with a river flowing through the basement, is you actually have to dig around the entire house. You have to install new weeping tile, because chances are that system is probably broken down or doesn't exist or it's not hooked up properly. You'd put a tar against the wall, and then you would put a plastic barrier against that, like a membrane. It's really involved. And if you've got decks and driveways and stuff around your house, which I did when I was living in another province, it's something I certainly didn't want to undertake, but I did realize 20, 30 years later, the owners of the house today actually did that. But that would be the way to prevent it. But that's a lot of work and a lot of expense. It's a job that a homeowner could do if you rented a little excavator or you had a really strong back and a shovel, but it's not something I would get into, and it might be a decision you have to make that you want to look for a different house.
Yeah, so it depends on the extent of it and perhaps the location and the accessibility if you are going to go the route that Michael's mentioned and properly resealing the outside of the foundation, or if it's as simple as grading and getting your drains, your gutters away from the foundation, and not have your sump pump just the hose pointing outside and doing a cycle too, because it's just pooling the water all around your foundation.
You want to have your sump pump hose long enough to extend to your neighbor's basement.
Okay, don't do that.
Selling your house with what we refer to as continued occupancy. I think you had a question about this or a statement a couple of weeks ago. I'm not sure if you're asking or you're just saying that you had a contract with continued occupancy, but essentially what this means, and this is certainly an option, I wouldn't take advantage of it if I was a home seller, or a home buyer more appropriately,
yes,
is somebody sells you their house, but they say, we're going to stay in it for 6 months, so we're going to continue to occupy the house. So you sort of convert from a homeowner to a tenant, and then you take possession of that house once they vacate. Patty, can you give us the 1,001 reasons why no homeowner or no home buyer should do this?
Well, now, as much as you, I know, jokingly say that, but with some level of seriousness, I have had this happen where it was very successful. And obviously, the buyers, they weren't ready to move to the island yet, but they just wanted the peace of mind knowing that they secured something, everything was in place. Yes, they became the homeowners, say on July 1st, but they weren't planning on taking occupancy or possession until April 1st. And the current owners, they were in no rush to have to move out. And because they obviously loved their home and it was maintained and looked after at such a high level, this turned out to be a great arrangement and situation. What I have, and the reason I brought this up the other day to you, Michael, was I have a seller who said they would consider selling their property if they could continue occupancy and transfer themselves from being the owner of the house to the tenant until the date that they had designated for when they needed to leave the island. But they didn't want to time everything so tight that, well, we're leaving on this date and we need to know that the house is sold by this date. That just seemed very stressful. So this was what they are coming up with as an option, and it may end up coming onto the market. We're still discussing it. Now, from a buyer's perspective, which is where you're getting into the red flag, Michael, portion, is you're really trusting that those sellers are going to continue to look after the home in the same manner. And again, if it's a home that is already a little questionable or it's a little tired, or, you might have a situation where they're on the cutting edge of maybe being a hoarder or something, you might want to just be a little mindful if you are even going to consider entering into that kind of contractual agreement. So really look at what is the condition. You might want a lawyer involved with this to make sure that you are well protected. It is not a realtor's responsibility. So if you're a realtor listening to this and you think, unless you're into property management, of course, but I'm just going to write a tenancy clause, I'm going to do all of this, and give free legal, service. Let the lawyers do that. They will protect the clients involved. We are the facilitator. I wouldn't want that responsibility on my head.
Not to mention the fact if a property manager is willing to work for free to create your legal documents, then their services are probably worth every penny of that free service.
Good point.
If you're going to do this, make sure you have a lease in place, which is a 24-page document the last time I looked in this province. Also, make sure you run it by your lawyer and have him write up another 25 pages. My biggest concern is this. They're going to destroy the house, or what's going to happen in certain provinces and states, the tenancy boards are very pro-tenant. So let's just say you buy this house in November, you intend to move into it 6 months later, and then your tenants decide, we can't find a place to move to, so we're staying. And then they fight you through the provincial court system, and now you're into legal fees and everything else. I've had to do this. I had one house where there was tenants, and of course, the first thing I asked them is, do you guys have a place to live? And they said, yeah, gonna move in with the family. Great. It came time for closing. They refused to move out.
Not good.
So we had to take them to court. So you also have that you're adding to the equation as well. If Patty does put this on the market and you're looking at this property, I urge you to look the other way and don't buy it, because you could be buying yourself into a real mess.
And absolutely.
Because this show's about transparency. I'm not going to candy coat it. Stay away from Patty's listing.
No, I'm not saying it's coming on.
You're blacklisted.
They're early on, and this is something that they've discussed with me.
It's a stupid idea, Patty.
I told them it is not an ideal situation. My recommendation is go find somewhere else to live. Make this a clean transaction.
Good plan. Getting to our next topic here. How many times do we hear as agents, purchasers, sellers, things? And we're going to get into certain things here furthermore into this podcast, but people make statements all the time, and they'll say, well, according, we should have this house, just as an example, this house has to be perfectly professionally cleaned, and it wasn't. Always ask before you get into any debates or conversations with real estate agents, purchasers, and sellers, in regards to a contract that's in place, ask them this. Can you tell me where in that contract it says that?
Good question.
Good question. We're going to address some more of this, but essentially, I find there's a lot of statements made that when I analyze the contracts, I think there's a lot of things that agents are doing that they just assume were in the contracts, but they never were, but it becomes common practice, so they think it's in the contract. Cleaning a house is one of these things, and we'll get into that later.
Absolutely. What I tell my clients is if it is not in writing, it does not exist.
Anytime a statement or request is made, revert back to the contract. This is just my notes here. Too many assumptions are made as to the contents that in reality don't exist, including cleaning the house prior to closing, which we're going to discuss next. Patty?
Yes.
I represent a home seller. You represent the home buyer.
Okay.
You show up at the pre-closing inspection and there's 2 dust balls on the main floor and a couple specks of dust on the kitchen countertop, and one of the windows isn't cleaned. You call me up and you say, "This is not to my purchaser's expectations. We wanted this house completely professionally cleaned before taking occupancy because my purchasers are a bunch of fusspots." So what I say, "Patty, first of all, I appreciate you calling. Can you tell me where in the contract it says that? In our contracts, does it say it has to be even cleaned?"
It is to be assumed.
Assumed does what? Makes an ass out of you?
And me, I know. But if this were to go, now the example that you've given with regards to the items I picked at, that is, and it's not that it hasn't happened. I've actually had a closing where, and you were involved, we were both, we had co-listed this property, and because there were crumbs in 1 or 2 of the kitchen drawers that our seller client, who was meticulous, missed, they refused to close. And this house had a central vac system. I had to go to this house, and I believe you ended up meeting because you could not believe this was what was going on. So I do believe that you did show up at this crazy, chaotic closing, and I plugged in the central vac. The seller client showed up as well, and I went over to the drawer, and in front of the agent and their client, I sucked up in the central vac the little crumbs, and there was like a little bit of onion paper and stuff too, because it was their drawer that they kept their onions in that in. And I sucked it up with the vacuum cleaner, and then I looked at the agent and I said, "Is there anything else you would like me to clean before I leave?" And there really wasn't, it was like a few little things, but this vacuum cleaner took care of it. This buyer's agent, which really upset me too and frustrated me, they could have done this. They could have just said, "You know what? It's easy to miss this. I'm not getting into that." Of course not. And
Always ask.
No, yes, you can ask, of course, but they could have easily just said, "You know what? We'll just plug this in." They inconvenienced my day. They inconvenienced the sellers. They made this big dramatic scene. We all ended up at this property, including the sellers. We now had this conversation discussion. It was, instead of a simple walkthrough, it turned into almost an hour and a half ordeal it was just ridiculous. And it did not say it had to be professionally cleaned. And we're human. Sometimes we might miss something.
What we're addressing here, just looking at our contracts, and these contracts would be similar to contracts all across North America, is there's no clause requiring the property be cleaned, professionally or otherwise, at closing. The agreement addresses possession, because I had this debate with the lawyer, and I know everyone thinks, the lawyers know more than the real estate agents. This lawyer was asking for the house to be cleaned, so I phoned him up, and I shouldn't have because he represented the purchaser, but I didn't care. And I said, "Where in the contract does it say the house has to be cleaned?" You know what he said to me?
What?
"It's not in the contract." So I'm pulling your bluff. Because he made a big deal, because the purchasers made a big deal. At the end of the day, and it wasn't us, the sellers or me, someone gave them some money to clean the house, but it wasn't in the contract. The only thing in the contract is vacant possession of the property. Bottom line here is, if you're one of these crazy fusspots that's going to walk away from a house because there's 2 dust balls on the main floor, I would do 2 things. Number 1, I would make sure that your purchase and sale agreement has a clause that says the house is to be professionally cleaned. However, there's a second part of this paragraph, which most agents are always going to miss. You tell me who you want to clean it, because you're a fusspot, and it doesn't matter who I hire, it's not going to be good enough. So tell me you want it professionally cleaned and who's going to do the cleaning.
Absolutely. The way, and if this were to go to some court or anything like that, what the standard or best practice is it's to be swept and wiped clean. That is the expectation. It is not to be professionally cleaned. If that is something that a buyer, it's really important to them. And I'm not labeling you a fusspot like Michael just did.
No, this guy was a fusspot.
Okay, well, you can speak about that. But if this is really important to you, because you may have, you might be a germaphobe.
Well, then maybe you should have had it in your contract.
Yes, that's what I'm saying, is if this is something that's really important to you, there is so much involved in buying and selling houses, real estate. Put this in a notebook if you are keeping notes of things to look for because you are a MAPS listener. This would be something that I would say to suggest or recommend to your agent. I do want it professionally cleaned. And I think that's excellent advice, Michael. If they have a cleaner or their agent, their representative knows of a great cleaner, that takes a little bit of responsibility off of the seller and sets everyone up for success. And that's what the goal and the objective should be.
And typically in the past, what you would see, and I didn't really want to introduce this to this particular discussion, is you would see vendors to have house professionally cleaned prior to the conveyance, and it has to be acceptable by the purchasers at their sole discretion. I think that leaves way too many doors open, and that's why I say if they want to professionally clean, they can tell us who they want to get to professionally clean it. I wouldn't even give them an out clause because it's getting a little bit ridiculous. You're moving in a new house. You might have to do some cleaning. That's okay.
That's a really good point. So if you're a seller and that clause is being presented to you, if you're being asked to have it professionally cleaned and you get it professionally cleaned, we don't know the standard. We don't even know if that's going to be the actual reason that they want out. Do not sign or agree to an out. If you are agreeing to have it professionally cleaned, that's it. It is black and white. It is getting professionally cleaned, but that does not mean the buyers have an out. If you can provide a receipt, an invoice saying, here's the company, that's on the company. The buyer can go after them and say, we want to have you back out here. But that's not an out for this contract agreement.
Because what could happen, and this is where Patty is going, presumably, is you come up to the pre-closing inspection, you've got this clause that says the house has to be cleaned and the purchasers have the sole discretion to decide whether or not it's clean up to their standards. They could essentially walk away. At the end of the day, they're probably not going to. At the end of the day, if you have a buyer that wants to buy and a seller that wants to sell, the deal is going to go together. But it never hurts to over-document things.
Yeah, but there could be an extenuating circumstance. Maybe the couple, if it is a couple that's purchasing it, splits up the week before, and then they go, oh, we've got this, one clause left to try to dissolve this contract. Keep your contracts clean and tight. Clean and tight contracts.
To what level?
Professionally.
Are you going to specify what lawyer has to write this contract or AI?
Okay.
Moving along. So after this house closed, there is more drama and what happened, and I can certainly understand the vendor being concerned here because, as we mentioned from past episodes, a lot of people stack transactions like little dominoes. House A sells, which triggers house B, which triggers house C, which triggers house D. I saw one series of transactions that had 5 houses stacked. The problem with this is not only do you have to align all your closing dates, your mortgage money has to show up on time, the paperwork has to show up on time, but what happened in this particular situation because the Canadian banking system is a pain in the ass at the best of times, is they placed the lawyer's check from the trust account on hold for a week.
No.
Yes.
Oh, that's not good.
No, and there's no reason for it either, because lawyers get in big trouble if they ever write fraudulent or NSF, non-sufficient fund checks. The moral of the story is, if you have your dominoes stacked, or maybe you don't, maybe you just want to pull that money out and invest it the day the house closes, get it in the form of probably a wire or a bank draft. Good advice?
That's very good advice. And time your closings too.
Well, you don't have to time them properly as long as you have clauses in there that add some latitude. For instance, in this particular case, you could say something like the closing date is this date. However, at the sole discretion of the purchaser, they may move this date by up to 10 days to allow clearance of funds.
And I understand that where the direction I was going to go, Michael, was that is the whole purpose and hopeful value that you find as a consumer in hiring a real estate professional. Because if you're trying to privately do these transactions and you don't understand or realize that there is a dominoes closing day, that you are going to be participating in, without proper representation and someone with experience and knowing how, to handle that day and staying on top and timing everything right down to the last second, you may find yourself in needing to pay for a hotel and hopefully closing the next day, or the situation that you just described, Michael, and you may not be getting in at all.
Well, in this particular case, they had sold their house and they were buying a house from someone that had bought a house.
Yes.
So it's affecting two other transactions. So now the seller of the house that they're moving into has to explain to that seller, which may or may not have bought a house, that, hey, we need to delay this by a week to 10 days, which just makes a disaster of all the paperwork, because now you've got to realign everything. And then the banks, being as forgiving as they are probably going to charge you interest, if not penalties, for not closing on time. So it turns into a bit of a disaster. But if you have the latitude built in, great. But the bottom line is, if you're going to get a check for a house closing and you need the money right away, or you want to have access to it right away, probably get it delivered to you in a form that's tangible and not locked up for a week, because the bank doesn't trust you, even though you've been a customer of theirs for 60 years.
Exactly.
As you can tell, I'm not a big fan.
I think we are all getting that.
Good. I'm sure you've experienced the same thing.
Well, yes, and banks don't like releasing funds until it's the last second. And then the other fun little obstacle that you have to navigate around is the lender, the financial institution that you're dealing with, are they on the other side of the country? Because we're obviously 4 hours ahead of BC, and I personally experienced this. My lender was in BC, and by the time they started their day and then decided to address my file, it was already on PEI. It was about 4:30, which would have been about 12:30 their time. So they still have the whole afternoon to deal with. And my closing was getting so tight, I almost thought it wasn't going to happen. Now, if I had that with a dominoes closing, it just wouldn't have closed. The property going forward, if the sellers of the property that I was purchasing had a property that they needed to close and purchase, well, my bank, my lender, left them 15 minutes or so.
I forgot about another proponent, or another thing that happened on another transaction here in the last month. Their house closes in another province, so they send the moving truck here, which is on the property, and it's not closing on time. The moving company is saying, we need our truck back because they were from out of province. So it turned into a mess there too, where they could have just sent their moving truck a week later, allowed some time for things to settle, get access to the house. But no, they had their moving truck there within 10 minutes of their lawyer's appointment, and it didn't close. So that's the other thing I want to space out is, don't send your stuff here until you know you have access to the house.
Yeah, you should.
Or have a provision for storage.
You could have a provision for storage, but then that just takes us down another rabbit trail where do you as a seller allow the buyers to move their stuff into your home or into your garage? So you're going to, hopefully, if you're a listener of this, are going to say no, because now we don't know.
There's too much liability.
100%.
They move a bunch of stuff in your garage. They tip over a gas can. The wife's a chain smoker, lights the whole place on fire. There may or may not be insurance in place at that point.
Then they say they don't want to close the next day.
House hasn't closed. And then they say they don't want the house because it's burned to the ground.
Yeah.
Don't let them in. Because the other thing I'm thinking about, because I'm always thinking from a negotiating standpoint, is there's no motivation to close the deal now because they're already in the house too.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, you don't let them in.
And
we didn't let them in, and they closed that as soon as they could because it was going to cost them thousands of dollars to deliver this furniture to a storage facility just for a few days because everything was so tight. Patty, this is enough nonsense for today.
Thanks again for listening to another episode of the Michael and Patty Show, otherwise known as MAPS, PEI's podcast that helps guide and navigate you through the buying and selling and a little bit of Prince Edward Island. We appreciate each and every one of you. And if you're looking for an extension to this podcast, we do have a private Facebook group called Moving to Prince Edward Island, spelt completely out, from the Michael and Patty podcast, where it is just as jam-packed and full of information as this podcast that you're listening to.
Maybe not this jam-packed.
Well, there is...
Semi-jam-packed.
Sure. There are summaries of every single episode that you can kind of pick what is most relevant to you so you don't have to listen to us rant on for 40 minutes, 45 minutes. You can decide this is exactly where I'm at. So you can go through and pick the episode that might be most relevant or applicable to you on that particular day or time. Plus there's Toolbox Tuesdays, and exactly what it says and means is I don't just give you one or two points on a topic. I do extensive research and I give you a whole toolbox on whether it's real estate language, it is radon, it is solar panels, it is moving, how to pack, questions with an insurance company. So Toolbox Tuesday is my favorite part of this group because you really do get a whole toolbox on that topic.
What color's your toolbox?
Well, mine would have to be red, but...
Have a great day, everybody.
Have a great day.